talk to you about how figuring out what the problem is sometimes just as important as figuring out how to answer that problem. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been working in cultural heritage institutions, those libraries, archives, and museums, since I was 14 years old. I started as a volunteer and then an intern and then was professionally qualified. And these institutions have always really meant a lot to me, and I've been very enthusiastic about them. I enjoyed the escapism that I would get from reading a good book, kind of a cliche, but true. Engaging with a really interactive museum exhibit, or the reverence I would feel reading a really historic archival document. But eventually, over the years, I discovered that not everyone is quite as passionate as I am about these institutions. So let me give you an example. So about a year after I was first professionally qualified to be a librarian, I was sitting at the reference desk in the library I worked at. And this was in New England, in the United States, where I'm from, if you hadn't figured that out. And two prisoners walked into the library. And this was actually a pretty common occurrence because there was a state penitentiary down the road. And I knew they were prisoners because they were in the prison jumpsuits. And so the minimum security prisoners would come to the library to collect the books for the prison library. It's something called interlibrary loan. Books are shared among libraries. So I see them coming and they say, we're here for the prison books. So I pick up the phone, I call my colleague in another area of the building and said, okay, please bring up the prison books. So we wait, and eventually one of the prisoners leans over to me and says, God, you must get so bored working here. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're incarcerated. Like, how is that, like, how do people who are incarcerated are suddenly pitying librarians? Like, how does that actually work? So more and more types of these examples would keep happening to me. So I would often be sitting on airplanes in the aisle seat, because I'm an aisle girl. And I would be waiting, watching those people walk down the aisle, dragging their oversized suitcases, seeing who's going to sit next to me. And I wanted to have a good neighbor because, I mean, let's face it, sometimes we're sitting next to these people for 10, 20 hours, depending on where we're going. So it was very much like a Goldilocks preposition. I wanted somebody who would chat with me, but not too much, who wouldn't hog the armrest, who wouldn't hit me on the side of the head when they were stuffing that oversized suitcase above in the overhead compartment, which happens to me more than I would like to say. So eventually I would get these what I call good neighbors, and they would chat with me. And eventually they would ask me what I did, and I would very passionately tell them that I was a librarian or an archivist or whatever I was doing at that time. And that's really what I spent a lot of my career doing before I became a lecturer here who studies libraries, archives, and museums. So I tell them what I did, and their response was usually very much, I didn't think libraries existed anymore. I thought they were dead. I thought the internet had replaced them, like that was what the internet was for. Or like, we have all this technology, I didn't think that they were like even existence or existed anymore. Unfortunately, I got this response more than I would have liked. But the good part of that was I developed a stellar response. So I would tell them that I was busier than ever. The circulation statistics were up. More people were visiting the library. I was helping people learn computer skills, apply for jobs online, doing genealogical research, developing programs for children, literacy programs, helping community groups find the information resources that they need. And I thought this was good. But eventually they would respond, being like, "Oh, okay, that's nice. I think I'm gonna do something else at this point." So this became. You would think I would have picked up on something at this point, but no. So it became really acute to me at one point when I was preparing my budget. I was a director at this point, a library director, in a small town in New England. And I was preparing my budget to present to the town officials. So you prepare the budget, the Excel spreadsheet with the numbers, and you get 10 minutes to present the budget to really justify why you needed the funds. So not only did I bring my passion to this, I brought data. And I thought that I was going to win the day. I had a great presentation. Again, statistics were up. More people than ever were visiting the library. More people were coming to programs. We had more programs. And I ended with a really passionate statement about how libraries are really for the public good, and they're good for democracy because they're the great equalizers. They provide free and equal access to information sources for all people. And this was particularly relevant in this area because it was well acknowledged that this wasn't the wealthiest area. So I thought I was going to win the day, finally, right? Well, after I finished, and I'm waiting for responses and questions, one of the select board members says to me in so many words, "I don't understand why we need to fund a library when I have a Kindle." Oh, unfortunately, another one of these responses. And I thought for a minute, because I was kind of flustered, and I really didn't expect someone to say this to me so acutely. So what did I do? I ratcheted up that passion, and I went back and I talked about those statistics even more. And he kind of just looked away at his phone. So I started to think that my methods weren't, the most effective. And I started to think more about how people were responding to me, and also what I was saying to them. And I thought about how it was the way that I had always learned to justify the value of the institutions that I worked in. I actually teach outreach now, and this is very common in the literature. So we have two kinds of themes that we use to justify the role of cultural heritage in society and make these budget arguments. And it all does come down to funding at some point, because this is what we need to survive. So these two arguments are impact, which is basically a measurable change. The data, those statistics, things are going up. We're seeing an upward trend, and we need finances to support that. We're making a difference, and you can measure that. And then something that I refer to as social justice. And this was the argument about libraries being there for the public good. Libraries, museums, and archives being there for the public good. Good for democracy, the great equalizer, and the entire society benefits when everybody has free access to cultural resources. And these arguments have been around for about 100 years, and they used to work really well. Even 100 years ago, 50 years ago, even maybe 30 years ago. But they weren't working as well now. And a lot of people will tell you, or as the people on the plains did, well, the problem is the internet and technology replaced these institutions. But I actually don't think that's the problem. It's related to the issue, but I wasn't convinced that that was actually the problem. So I started to try to bite off chunks of this in my research. So for example, I did a study in 2016. I observed the Inspiring Ireland 1916 project, and this was a project of the Digital Repository of Ireland, and I have to really thank them for allowing me access to this event so I could do my research. So in this event, everyday people were invited to bring their family heirlooms or things from their personal collection, artifacts, that represented the 1916 Easter Rising, and this was, of course, for the commemoration. So they would bring these objects, they would talk to a volunteer about the history of the item, its significance, and then the item would be digitally scanned or digitally captured, and it would be used to create a digital exhibit that included these new personal items and also institutional collections. It was this idea that we can merge the public and the private to be more representative of society. And this is very linked to that social justice type argument. We want to involve people to make the institutions more diverse. So there was a little bit of a queue when people were waiting for their item to be digitally scanned. So I would go over to these people and I would say, do you want to have a chat with me? I just want to ask you a few questions. Tell me about your item. Tell me why you're here. Because I really wanted to learn from their voices why they were there. And I'm a qualitative researcher. I work in the subjective because I think we can really learn a lot about people's opinions and their point of view. So a lot of people at a lot of the Inspiring Ireland events would talk to me, and they would start telling me they were there to share their story. Okay, that was pretty evident, right? But the more they kept talking, and after I dug into the data and did some analysis, I found it was really that they wanted to share their story as a way to have their say about the commemoration. So for example, a family brought an heirloom, and they wanted to explain their family's role in the Rising, to make sure that was recorded, because they felt that was really important, and that was having their say. And another woman from Kerry was saying that, nobody knows the rising actually happened outside of Dublin. And I have an artifact that demonstrates how it happened in Kerry. And I think people really need to know that. Or somebody would say, I have an item that represents the everyday person, and everyone just remembers those leaders, the leaders of the rebellion. They don't remember the everyday person and how it affected them. So I think that story needs to be shared. So it was really about having their say. So I also did another study concurrently with that one, also in 2016, also about the rising. You might see a trend here in the way that finances are working for funding research. But a colleague and I developed a mobile walking tour app of the rising, about 10 sites around Dublin city centre, so like the GPO. And we would pair a site with a historic photograph digitized from a Dublin library, archive, or museum, and we would include a narrative. We would take a snippet from the digitized photo, and using augmented reality would place it over the modern day image. So somebody would look through their mobile phone viewfinder and see like snippets of the building as it used to look, or people in historic dress, that kind of thing. So I had people use the app, and I asked them what they really liked about it, what they didn't like, did they learn anything, and what just their general thoughts were. Because again, I'm looking at the subjective. So people really liked the experience, and they got a lot of joy from interacting with the cultural objects. But what they really liked was that they could make it their own. So they could visit the sites in any order. They could spend 5 minutes over here and an hour over here, or they could combine it with other activities. Say they're waiting for the Lewis and they've got 5 minutes and they can interact with cultural heritage for 5 minutes there, or they've got to run errands around town and they can visit these sites when they're doing something else. So people were getting a really enjoyable experience, and it wasn't at a physical building. Because a lot of us, we don't have time to spend half a day at a museum or an archive or a library. Maybe we do on holiday. Maybe we get to go to that museum when we're on holiday. But that's only once a year. So I thought about what these two project results had in common, and I settled on it was a lot about control. Not necessarily control in a bad way, but the fact that people could control their experiences and their interactions. And that was really related to personalization. People could personalize their interactions or share their personal story. And I thought back to how that may affect this argument about how libraries, museums, archives aren't as relevant anymore because of technology. And the thing is, technology, anything technological, allows us to personalize it. We can change the settings. We can't really change a setting on a library or an archive or a museum. Of course, they have apps, but I would argue that this small attempt at personalization is within an overall structure that is designed for the masses, because that's how they were designed 100 years ago. And a lot of those structures still look the same. The missions, the work practices, the services that they offer, they work on this communal model. But this communal model doesn't seem to be working in an age where we just expect personalization. So I thought about this and how I was able to really come to this problem. It's not about the library was killed by the internet or the museum was killed by technology, something like that. What it is these institutions haven't figured out how to make an argument for their place in society in a society that is highly personalized, for better or for worse. So that's where I am right now, and unfortunately I don't have some wonderful revelations to give you. But it was quite a process, as I've demonstrated, to get to what the problem actually is. So now when I'm on airplanes, I still hope to not be hit in the head with the oversized suitcases, which again happens more often than I want. But I don't wish for a good neighbor. I accept whoever sits next to me, and then I really listen to them to try to solve or to try to communicate with them in a way that I think will suit us best. And I think that we can all do that with some of the problems we might be struggling with. We've got to first identify the problem, listen, and then figure out how to respond. Thank you.